Hey guys, tonight we dive into the world of Japanese tales, so before you get comfy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. So, kick back and relax as we immerse into this magical journey together. So with that being said, let's go.
The air in Kyoto hung heavy with the perfume of cherry blossoms and the hushed murmurs of unrest. Petals drifted like faded prayers across the narrow canals, gathering in soft clusters at the feet of passers-by. It was the spring of 1864, a season poised on the edge of beauty and violence. The Tokugawa shogunate still ruled from Edo, but the foundations trembled beneath their centuries-old authority. In smoky tea-houses and shadowed temples, samurai and merchants alike debated with quiet intensity. The emperor's name, once forbidden in such circles, now passed from lip to lip like a sacred promise. In the heart of the Gion district, Hana dipped a fine brush into gold leaf mixed with lacquer, her movements precise, almost reverent. She leaned over a silk fan stretched taut upon a low table, painting the elegant curve of a willow tree beside a shimmering lake. Her workshop was modest, nestled behind her grandfather's home, with paper screens filtering the sunlight into dappled warmth. Brushes of all sizes hung from the beams. Jars of powdered pigments and delicate washi paper lined the shelves. The scent of ink and hinoki wood lingered in the air. Hana was 20, her black hair tied into a loose bun with a strip of indigo-dyed cloth. Her kimono bore the faded colors of repeated wear, but her sleeves were always carefully tied back when she worked. Her hands, nimble, calloused, and stained faintly with paint, were the tools of her trade. She had been drawing since she could grasp a brush, trained by her grandfather, Ito-san, a retired woodblock printer of some renown. But it was Hana's fans that had drawn attention across Kyoto. Each was a living scene, capturing moments of nature, love, and legend in strokes so delicate they seemed to breathe. As she added the final flecks of gold to the sleeve of Prince Genji beneath the willow tree, a familiar voice called from the garden. Hana-chan. She rose, brushing her hands against her apron as she stepped into the corridor. Her grandfather stood just outside, his bent frame wrapped in a worn haori. His beard, once thick and black, was now a soft white fringe that moved when he frowned, which he did often, and more so in recent weeks. "There are more shinsengumi on the streets," he muttered, glancing toward the gate. "I counted 6 on horseback this morning alone, and 2 others on foot asking questions near the corner tea house." Hana's brow knit. "Looking for someone?" "Looking for dissent," he replied, eyes dark. "Anyone who speaks of the emperor too freely. Anyone who meets behind closed doors." She sighed and moved to his side, touching his arm. "I only need ink and brushes from the market. I'll take the main roads. I'll be quick." His hand closed over hers, grip surprisingly firm. "Be careful, Hana. These days, even the wrong glance can be taken as rebellion." She smiled softly. "I'm just a fan painter, grandfather. What trouble could I possibly invite?" But even as she said it, a strange tension stirred in her chest, like the air before a summer storm. That evening, as the lanterns were lit and the sky bled into dusk, Hana set out with a woven basket over her arm. The streets of Gion buzzed with their usual life. Rickshaws creaked past. Courtesans glided between houses with practiced grace. Drunken merchants laughed too loudly, while monks whispered blessings beneath shrine torii. She moved among them, eyes sharp, heart steady. At the paper shop, she purchased new rolls of washi and a small pot of imported Prussian blue pigment, a luxury, but necessary for a fan she'd been commissioned to paint for a tea mistress in Pontocho. As she left, the sound of shamisen music from a nearby okaya tugged at her steps, and she paused beneath a lantern to listen. Then she turned, deciding on a whim to take a shortcut, a narrow alley behind the bathhouse, a path she rarely used but remembered from childhood errands. It twisted between wooden fences and moss-streaked stone walls, always damp, always quiet. Halfway through, she stopped. Voices, low, urgent, echoed from a courtyard just beyond the bend. She pressed herself into the shadows, heart fluttering. Through a gap in the wood slats, she saw 5 men, standing around a lantern set on the ground. The light caught the curve of swords beneath their silk robes. She recognized one immediately. Lord Akihiko. He was a high-ranking shogunate official, known in Gion for his cold demeanor and his role in several mysterious disappearances. His presence here, in this hidden place, was unsettling. She strained to hear. "Loyal to the emperor must act before summer," said one voice. "The clans in Satsuma and Chashu are restless," another muttered. "They wait for our signal." Then a fan was produced, unlike any she had seen. A deep, blood-red lacquer, with a winding design in gold. It was beautiful and dangerous. "The code is in the pattern," Akihiko said. "It must reach Edo by month's end." Just then, a cat leapt from the shadows, knocking over a crate. Hana's breath caught. She hadn't moved, but the noise startled the men. Akihiko turned sharply. "Who's there?" Panic surged in her limbs. She stepped back, then ran, heart pounding, breath shallow. Footsteps exploded behind her. They were chasing her. She turned a corner into the main street, blending into the crowd. But they were close. She ducked into the first open door, a tea house. Her sandals slipped on the floor as she stumbled, bumping into a young man carrying a tray. Her basket flew from her hands. Paper, brushes, ink, and something unfamiliar, tumbled out. Her gaze fell on it. A crimson fan. Her blood turned to ice. It wasn't hers. It was identical to the one she'd seen in the courtyard. She didn't know how. Had it been dropped during the chase? Slipped into her basket by accident? But she knew one thing, she was no longer just a fan painter. She had witnessed something forbidden, and now she carried proof of it. And someone would come looking. Hana clutched the crimson fan, her fingers trembling despite the heat of the tea house. The lacquered surface glinted in the lamplight like fresh blood. Around her, the murmur of conversation resumed, unaware that history had just shifted in the hands of a fan painter. "Hana-san," the tea server whispered, his brow furrowed as he helped gather her scattered items. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said quickly, eyes darting toward the doorway. The 2 men who had followed her were nowhere in sight, not yet. "Thank you. I slipped." He nodded uncertainly but accepted her answer. She repacked her supplies with trembling fingers, carefully nestling the crimson fan at the bottom of the basket, wrapped in a length of plain linen. As she rose, she bowed slightly to the young man and fled the tea house with the silence of a shadow. The walk home was slow, cautious. Every footstep behind her felt like the whisper of a blade. She passed the lanterns of Gion, glowing like sentinels, and the occasional drunk still swaying from side to side in song. But nothing pursued her, not visibly. By the time she reached her grandfather's gate, she was drenched in sweat despite the cool spring air. Inside, the scent of barley tea wafted through the house. Old Man Ito was seated by the hearth, fanning the embers. He looked up as she entered. "You were gone too long," he said with mild reproach, though worry underlined his tone. "Did something happen?" Hana hesitated at the threshold. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She wanted to tell him everything, the alley, the meeting, Lord Akihiko, the crimson fan now hidden in her basket. But she couldn't. Not yet. It would worry him. It might endanger him. Or worse, it might place him under the watchful eye of the Shinsengumi. "I took the scenic route," she said instead, setting the basket aside and kneeling by the hearth. "Too many people on the main roads." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You have your mother's eyes," he said quietly. "They used to lie with the same guilt." Hannah said nothing. The silence between them was not cold, just heavy with unspoken truths. That night, she sat alone in her workroom long after the oil lamp burned low. She unwrapped the crimson fan and placed it gently on the table. It was exquisite, unlike any she'd ever held. The design appeared simple at first, 3 cranes in flight over a winding river. But the more she stared, the more unsettling it became. The brushwork was strange, not just artistic, but deliberate. Symbolic. She traced the river pattern with her fingertip. It curved unnaturally, forming a path that didn't follow the rules of nature. The cranes, too, flew in odd directions, not toward the horizon, but away from something. It wasn't art. It was a cipher. She couldn't decipher it alone, but someone could. She rose and walked to a shelf in the back of the room, pulling down an old lacquered box bound in silk cord. Inside were her mother's old calligraphy scrolls, now brittle with age. Beneath them, wrapped in worn paper, were her grandfather's discarded prints, and between them, a single letter sealed in wax with a chrysanthemum crest. She stared at the seal for a long moment. Kenji. The name was only a whisper in her mind, but it came with a flood of memory, a boy once sent by her grandfather's old friend to study woodblock printing in Kyoto. He had lived with them for a summer 5 years ago. He had been sharp-eyed, curious, and too quick to smile. And he had vanished almost overnight, returning to Edo with rumors of trouble at his master's workshop. That letter was the last thing he'd sent, unopened by her grandfather, who had called it a path too dangerous to follow. Now, Hannah opened it. Inside, in Kenji's confident hand, were just a few lines. "If the shadows return to Kyoto, find me through the dusk lantern. I will always answer if your message carries the mark of the crescent crane." She looked down at the crimson fan. 3 cranes. Her hand shook as she folded the letter again. The next morning, Hannah rose before the sun. She placed the crimson fan beneath a false bottom in her supply basket and wrapped herself in a plain traveling kimono. She left her hair unadorned, her face bare. She told her grandfather she was visiting the temple at Kayamizadera, not a lie, just not the whole truth. The dusk lantern was a riddle, but not an unfamiliar one. Years ago, Kenji had taken her to a hidden tea house in the southern district, one only open during twilight hours, a meeting place for poets, performers, and sometimes men with darker trades. It was there he had told her about codes hidden in prints, secret messages carried through brushwork. She remembered its name now. It wasn't written on any signboard, but locals called it Tasagare no Hai, the twilight flame. As she walked through the morning mist toward the district, she caught sight of something that made her blood run cold. 2 men posted at the corner of the street, one of them unmistakably from the alley the night before. Their eyes swept the crowd. They were still looking for her. She kept her head down and moved swiftly. The dusk lantern, if it still existed, might be her only chance at understanding the fan, and staying alive. She was no longer just a painter. She was a witness. And someone, somewhere in Kyoto, wanted that witness silenced. The streets of Kyoto shimmered beneath a veil of morning haze as Hannah made her way south, her footsteps quick but measured. Though the market stalls hadn't yet opened and the neighborhood still slumbered behind closed shutters, she knew better than to assume safety. The city had changed. There was danger in every shadow now. The district she entered was older, less polished than Gion. The stone walkways were uneven, and moss crept between the planks of closed storefronts. Here, The perfume of cherry blossoms gave way to the scent of iron and wet wood. Fewer eyes watched her, but those that did lingered longer. She passed an abandoned sake house with boarded windows. A faded banner still hung above its doorway, the image of a crane in mid-flight, stitched in pale thread. She paused, heart fluttering. The crescent crane. A message hidden in plain sight. Across the narrow canal, half obscured by a leaning plum tree, was a squat two-story building with no sign. Its door was carved with a simple, flame-like swirl, just as she remembered. Tassagare no Hai. The dusk lantern. Hannah hesitated only a moment before stepping through the gate and into the cool darkness of the entry hall. The interior smelled of cedar and old tea. A single woman in a russet kimono sat behind a low counter, her eyes sharp despite her age. "Are you open?" Hannah asked softly. The woman studied her for a breath too long. "We open only when the sun touches the bell of the eastern tower," she said. "You are early." "I was told to come in the morning," Hannah replied, lowering her voice. "By someone who paints in shadow and signs with cranes." That made the woman's eyes narrow, not in suspicion, but in recognition. She gestured silently to a side door. Hannah followed her through a narrow corridor, every board beneath her feet creaking as if remembering secrets. They emerged into a small back room with a low table and cushions. Paper screens filtered the pale sunlight into soft amber. "Wait here," the woman said. "Do not leave, no matter who knocks." Then she was gone. Alone, Hannah unwrapped the crimson fan and laid it on the table. Her eyes traced its surface again and again. The river twisted in unnatural ways, a path. The cranes formed a triangle, a location. She began to sketch the fan onto spare parchment, each detail copied with reverent precision. Footsteps echoed outside the screen. She tensed. Then the door slid open, and a man stepped inside. He was older than she remembered, broader in the shoulders, his face more angular, but the eyes were unmistakable. Quick, dark, and too full of mischief to belong to someone with his grim aura. "Kenji," she breathed. He smiled faintly, then bowed. "Hannah. I wondered if I'd ever see you again. You've grown dangerous." She laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "I was nearly killed last night. Then you came to the right place." He knelt across from her, gaze falling instantly to the crimson fan. His hand hovered over it, but he didn't touch. "Where did you get this?" "I saw a secret meeting in an alley. Lord Akihiko was there. He mentioned Edo, the emperor, rebellion. One of the men had a fan like this. I fled, and somehow, this ended up in my basket." Kenji went very still. "You saw Akihiko in person?" "Yes." "And they know you saw them?" "They chased me." She paused. "I think I lost them, for now." Kenji looked away, swore under his breath. "This isn't just a fan. It's a tactical cipher, encoded directions, likely a route or rendezvous. Each crane represents a contact point. The river is the order of passage. It's how resistance groups communicate." "Resistance?" Hannah whispered. "You mean those who support the emperor?" Kenji nodded. "And those who want to unseat the shogunate, or control what comes after. These fans are passed by hand, never written down. To even glimpse one, is to become a threat." Hannah's breath caught. "So what do I do?" "You're already in it now," he said quietly. "They'll come for you again, especially if they think you understood any of what you saw. Which means you have two choices." He met her gaze, no longer the smiling apprentice she had once known. "You can run. Hide. Hope Akihiko believes you were a bystander. Or, you can help us. Us? She echoed. I work with the Ishin Shirshir, he said softly. We're not one group, more a network. Rebels, idealists, old clans seeking to restore imperial rule. I deliver messages, forge prints, pass symbols in brushstrokes. We have allies everywhere. But what we lack is someone like you, someone with access to the elite, to the tea houses, to the courtiers who buy your fans. She hesitated. And you want me to be a spy? Kenji leaned closer. I want you to be what you already are, an artist. One who sees what others miss. One who can move unnoticed through dangerous spaces. But I won't lie to you, this path will cost you. Hana looked down at her hands, the same hands that had painted willow trees and lovers meeting beneath the moon. Could they also paint rebellion? She closed the fan slowly. I'll help, she said. Kenji let out a slow breath, the weight of her choice settling between them. Then we begin now, he said. There's something hidden in this fan, something Akihiko needs delivered before the month's end. We're going to decipher it first. And when we do, we'll decide whether he ever sees it again. Outside, the sun had risen past the bell tower, and Kyoto glowed in gold. But Hana could no longer see the city the way she had before. The game had begun. And she was now one of its pieces. The next days passed in a blur of ink, whispers, and narrow escapes. Hana returned to her studio under a fragile pretense of normalcy, but nothing was the same. Every brushstroke felt weighted with hidden meaning. Every visitor at her door might be a messenger, or a spy. The crimson fan lay hidden beneath a false drawer in her workbench, wrapped tightly in silk. She dared not keep it in plain sight, even in her own home. Kenji had instructed her to continue her daily routine, to paint, to sell her fans as if nothing had changed. But now, each commission became a potential thread in the web he was weaving. Messages were smuggled through motifs, a crane facing left instead of right, a wave painted with 3 crests instead of 2, a wisteria blossom blooming too early in the season. These were the codes, whispered between brush and paper. Each morning, Hana met Kenji behind the old shrine in Maruyama Park, near the great weeping cherry tree. He brought news from the movement, allies recruited, couriers lost, rumors of the Shinsengumi tightening their grip. He never stayed long. They spoke quietly, always in the shadow of the tree, always pretending to pray. One morning, as pale blossoms drifted from the branches like ash, Kenji's expression was grim. Akihiko's men raided a safe house near Sanjo, he said. 3 were taken. 1 was carrying a duplicate of the crimson fan. Hana froze. A duplicate? We tried to create a false version to throw them off, he explained. But they knew it wasn't the original. They're narrowing their search. One of the men mentioned a woman artist. Her stomach twisted. They know it was me. They suspect. Not enough to act openly, but they've begun asking questions in Gion. A chill swept down her spine. Her customers. Her neighbors. Even a wrong glance could betray her now. I'll move the fan, she said. Tonight. But that night never came as planned. It was early evening when the knock came at her workshop door. Not hurried, not loud, polite, almost friendly. She opened it to find a man dressed in deep blue robes, his hair tied in a warrior's knot. His eyes were sharp and unreadable, his smile thin. Forgive the intrusion, Hana-san, he said with the calm of a man who was never refused. I am Shiba of the Shinsengumi. Might I have a word? Her heart slammed against her ribs. She stepped aside silently, forcing calm into her limbs. He entered, his eyes sweeping the room. You live alone? With my grandfather. Not here? He's at the temple tonight. Prayers for my grandmother. A dutiful man, Sheba murmured. He turned to her workbench, admiring a half-finished fan depicting cranes over Lake Biwa. Beautiful work. You're very talented. Thank you, Hannah said carefully. I hear your fans are popular with the ladies of the court. Even with certain, influential lords. She said nothing. Sheba's gaze sharpened. A fan was stolen several nights ago. Crimson lacquer. Gold river design. You haven't come across one like that? No, she lied. He watched her face. Then, slowly, he picked up the fan on her table. Strange, isn't it? How something so delicate can carry so much meaning. He turned the fan in his hands, then returned it gently. If you do see such an item, he said, I trust you'll report it. Lord Akihiko has taken a personal interest in its recovery. It would be unwise to interfere. She bowed deeply. Of course. He lingered a moment longer, then slipped through the door without another word. As soon as he was gone, Hannah collapsed against the doorframe, her legs trembling. Sweat dampened the back of her neck. She had seconds. She moved swiftly to her workbench, unfastening the hidden drawer and pulling out the wrapped fan. She tucked it beneath her kimono sash, hidden beneath layers of cloth, then snatched her cloak and slipped into the night. She didn't go to Kenji. Not yet. She needed time. A place to think. She ran through the quiet streets, heart pounding, until she reached the Kamo River. There, beneath the moonlight, she crouched beneath a willow and unwrapped the fan. Her fingers trembled as she traced its gold lines again. And suddenly, it clicked. The 3 cranes weren't just symbols, they were directional markers. And the river? It didn't represent a natural path, it was the map of Kyoto's underground canal system. A route. A smuggler's path. The fan wasn't just a message. It was a guide. The water beneath the city was cold, colder than Hannah had imagined. Her fingers were stiff as she gripped the side of the narrow skiff, the crimson fan clutched tightly beneath her sleeve. The canal was pitch black except for the occasional flicker of light from the lantern bobbing at the front of the boat. Kenji sat at the stern, pole in hand, guiding them silently through the labyrinth of tunnels beneath Kyoto. They had entered through a hidden hatch beneath a granary near the southern wall, its entrance long disused, masked by crates and old straw. The passage had been part of an older trade route, forgotten, until the resistance unearthed it. You were right, Kenji said, his voice hushed but urgent. The river on the fan matches this tunnel precisely. Each bend, each angle. Whoever painted it had intimate knowledge of this route. And the cranes? She asked, voice tight with cold and tension. 3 junctions. 3 delivery points. All critical. He handed her a folded map, a rough sketch he had made earlier, layering it with her sketches of the fan. Here, here, and here. 2 are drop points. The third, we're not sure. They passed beneath a low archway where roots curled like fingers from the stone. Hannah glanced up, heart hammering. She had never known this world existed beneath the painted streets of her city, a dark mirror of Gion, silent and secretive. At the second junction, Kenji signaled the boatman to slow. A narrow passage branched off, low and tight. He turned to Hannah. I need you to wait here. This branch leads to a shrine near the eastern ridge. If I'm not back in 15 minutes, leave. She stared at him. What if something goes wrong? He gave her a grim smile. Then I'll hope you painted another way out. With that, he ducked into the passage and vanished. Hannah waited. The minutes stretched like thread about to snap. The lantern's flame danced across the water, casting warped shadows. She sat still, every nerve coiled. Then, footsteps. But not Kenji's. Voices, echoing through the tunnels. Her breath caught. Shinsengumi. They were here. The boatman hissed, "Get down." She obeyed instantly, pressing herself flat against the hull. Her sleeve brushed the fan, still dry, still whole. She prayed it stayed that way. The voices came closer. Orders barked. Boots splashed in shallow water. And then, suddenly, silence. A thump. A groan. Kenji appeared out of the shadows, one arm bloodied, the other dragging a body behind him. His eyes locked on hers. "Go," he rasped. The boatman didn't wait. He pushed them off, the boat scraping stone. As they sped through the narrow canal, Hana reached for Kenji's wounded arm. Blood soaked through his sleeve, hot and slick. "What happened?" she asked, voice breaking. He gritted his teeth. They were waiting. Someone told them. Hana stared at him. But how? Kenji didn't answer. His eyes were storm-dark now, distant. Distrustful. When they reached the granary, they emerged like ghosts, soaked, bloodied, breathless. Kenji collapsed near a wall. Hana tore her outer kimono into strips and bound his wound as best she could. "Kenji," she whispered, "we have to find out who betrayed us." He winced but nodded. "There's someone close. Closer than I thought." The next morning, Hana returned home just before dawn. Her grandfather was awake, seated in the courtyard with his tea, as if he had never moved. "You're hurt," he said simply, seeing the dried blood on her sleeve. "I fell," she lied. He studied her, then looked away. "You're walking deeper into something you can't walk back out of." "I know." He nodded slowly. "Then at least walk with your eyes open." Later that day, she went to deliver a fan, a new commission, a delicate piece featuring phoenixes rising from peony blossoms. The client was Lady Masuyo, a wealthy patron of the arts known for her parties and connections. Hana had painted for her before. The estate was quiet when she arrived, no guards, no visitors. The servant who greeted her was unfamiliar. She hesitated on the threshold. Lady Masuyo met her in the inner chamber, dressed in crimson robes. Her smile was polite, too polite. "You've outdone yourself, Hana-san," she said, unfurling the fan with graceful fingers. "Truly beautiful work. This will catch many eyes." "Thank you," Hana said softly. Her instincts screamed. Something was wrong. Masuyo's next words froze her blood. "I've heard that your work has begun to catch other eyes as well. Lord Akihiko, for example. He's quite taken with your style." "So, coded." Hana couldn't move. "Don't look so surprised," Masuyo murmured. "I've always believed in backing the winning side. And right now, dear Hana, that's not yours." Before she could react, the door behind her slid open. Shiba stepped through. "Miss me?" he said with a smile. The sliding door slammed shut behind her. Shiba stepped forward with the ease of a man who knew no one in the room could challenge him. His dark eyes raked over Hana with the cold detachment of a surgeon. Lady Masuyo stood aside gracefully, folding the crimson fan in her hands, the very one Hana had believed hidden. Somehow, it had been taken. "It's beautiful work," Shiba said, circling her. "A shame it's filled with lies." "I paint only what's asked," Hana replied evenly, though her mouth had gone dry. "That fan was a gift commission." I was told nothing of its meaning. Is that so? He said with a soft, mocking tone. And yet, your path crosses with rebels. Hidden canals. Encoded maps. He gestured at the fan in Masuyo's hands. That piece of lacquered treason has traveled far. And now it has returned. Masuyo placed it carefully on a silk cloth, her expression unreadable. Hana-san, you've always had such talent. It's tragic when talent becomes misguided. You sold me, Hana said softly, finally meeting her eyes. Lady Masuyo didn't flinch. I protected myself. We all choose the world we wish to survive in. Shiba stepped closer, lowering his voice. Lord Akihiko will be most interested in what you know. He's a patient man, but not endlessly so. If you cooperate, perhaps you'll be allowed to return to your brush. And if I don't? His smile vanished. Then you'll be forgotten. 2 guards entered, binding her wrists with a silken cord, deceptively soft, but impossibly strong. They led her through a side entrance into a palanquin draped in red cloth. No one saw her leave. She was taken across Kyoto under cover of dusk, down hidden alleys and quiet roads. The palanquin finally stopped at a narrow compound nestled behind a no theater, one of Akihiko's personal safe houses. Inside, the air was dry and still, like a tomb. They placed her in a room no larger than a storage closet, its floor lined with woven straw, its only light a square of moonlight from a latticed window too high to reach. The door closed with a dull thud. She waited. Time unraveled. She didn't know how many hours passed, only that eventually, the door opened. Lord Akihiko stepped inside. He was taller than she remembered, or perhaps the room was simply smaller. His robes were black, his face unreadable. He carried no sword, yet Hana felt more threatened by him than the guards who had bound her. He sat across from her, folding his legs in perfect silence. You've caused quite the inconvenience, he said, as if remarking on the weather. Hana said nothing. He tilted his head. You're young. Talented. Connected. You could be useful. Yet instead, you choose to wander in the dark, helping men who'd burn this country to the ground. I don't help anyone, Hana said calmly. I paint fans. And those fans carry treason in their strokes. He leaned forward, eyes sharp. You saw something you were never meant to. And you took something that didn't belong to you. I want to know who helped you. Names. Places. I have nothing to give you. You have everything to give me, he said softly. And you will, in time. He stood and gestured to a guard. Let her sit in silence. Sometimes that breaks people faster than pain. The hours stretched into a day. Then another. No food. Barely any water. The walls pressed inward. But Hana did not break. When the door finally opened again, it wasn't Akihiko who entered. It was Shiba. He knelt beside her with something in his hands, one of her own fans. A piece she had painted months ago, a simple design of plum blossoms in snow. He turned it gently. Beautiful, he said. I used to think I'd want one for my mother. But now, I think I'll burn it. She looked at him, silent. Tell me where the second fan is. She blinked. Second? There were 2 copies made. You smuggled one. Where is the other? She said nothing. Shiba sighed and rose. You'll regret your silence. But as he left, a paper scrap slipped from the fan and fluttered to the floor. Unintentional, or intentional? When she was alone again, she crawled toward it. A single word written in charcoal, barely legible. tsuru, the word for crane. And beneath it, a crude sketch of the tea house sign she knew well. The dusk lantern. Kenji. That night, a sound scratched softly at the wall. A whisper. Hana. She scrambled to the panel. Kenji? No time. I bribed a servant. You'll have one chance. A pause. When the third bell rings tomorrow, break the lamp. The smoke will signal me. I'll be waiting in the canal behind the outer wall. She wanted to weep with relief. Kenji, they know about the second fan. I know. I hid it. But we must leave Kyoto. Tonight. Then silence. The next day, as the sun passed the peak of the sky, Hana sat in her chamber, watching the fragile paper lantern beside her. Her wrists still bore bruises from the cord. The third bell rang. She took the lantern and slammed it against the floor. Flames burst across the matting, smoke filled the room in seconds. The guards shouted. She threw herself toward the door as it opened, coughing, stumbling. A hand yanked her into the corridor. Kenji. They ran. Down a narrow hall, past stunned guards blinded by smoke. Out a side door, into the alley. Behind them, the safe house was in chaos. At the canal, a boat waited. They leapt in. As it glided away beneath the moonlight, Kenji finally turned to her. You still want to paint fans? She coughed, breathless. Only ones that set cities on fire. They didn't look back. Kyoto would burn soon enough. The village of Yabuhara nestled between green hills and mist-covered cypress trees, far from Kyoto's churning heart. Here, the world moved at the rhythm of mountain winds and the chirping of sparrows. It was a place of silence and survival, perfect for fugitives. Hana stepped down from the cart with aching legs and a racing mind. The journey had taken 2 days, winding through forgotten forest paths and abandoned checkpoints. She had ridden most of the way beside sacks of millet, her face veiled by a travel cloak and wide-brimmed hat. Kenji had walked behind the cart, limping from an older wound that hadn't healed since their last escape. The house they came to was humble, a thatched-roof hut at the edge of the forest. It belonged to one of Kenji's old contacts, a blind monk named Tetsuro who owed Kenji a favor from long ago. The man never asked questions. He offered food, shelter, and no judgment. Hana bathed in silence that first evening, scrubbing the soot and blood from her hands with mountain water so cold it bit to the bone. When she emerged, clean and shivering, Kenji had already lit a fire and laid out rice and miso broth. He looked exhausted. His hair had grown longer in the past few weeks. His face was leaner, older. And yet, when he looked at her, his eyes still softened. We can rest here, he said, handing her the bowl. For a little while. For how long? Until the wind changes. She smiled weakly. It always does. They slept side by side in the main room, fully clothed, weapons within reach. Hana tried to relax, to let the safety of the mountain seep into her bones. But at night, she dreamed of fans painted in blood, of Akihiko's calm voice, and of smoke curling from rooftops in Gion. Over the next few days, she began painting again. Not messages. Not codes. Just scenes, deer beneath pine trees, lovers embracing by moonlight, cranes landing on rippling ponds. Her brush moved with newfound precision, sharpened by fear and forged in fire. She found herself seeing differently, seeing with intent. Her hands remembered how to be gentle, even if her heart didn't. Kenji watched her work one evening. The firelight danced across his face as he spoke. You never asked me why I came back for you. I didn't need to. He laughed softly. Maybe you should have. I've done many things for the cause. Good things. Terrible things. But saving you, that was mine. Not theirs. Hana set down her brush. You never really left me behind, Kenji. Not even 5 years ago. He was quiet. Then, I wanted to stay. But I was ordered away. The movement needed someone inside Edo, close to the printmakers who were shifting loyalties. I thought if I left suddenly, it would keep you out of it. It didn't. I see that now, he said, with a faint, bitter smile. Silence fell between them again, not heavy, but tentative. Like two people rediscovering a song they once sang together. It was on the 7th morning that the quiet broke. A traveler arrived, a ronin with a straw hat pulled low and a katana strapped to his back. Tetsuro spoke with him briefly at the gate, then ushered him in. Kenji rose at once, hand near his dagger, but the ronin bowed deeply. I come in peace. My name is Hideo. I carry a message from Kyoto. Kenji tensed. From whom? Hideo reached into his robe and produced a fan. It was familiar. Too familiar. Painted in Hana's own style. But it was not one of hers. She stepped forward, taking it gently. The design was of falling sakura, petals scattered across a rushing river. At first glance, it was a beautiful, if melancholy, piece. But Hana's eye caught the patterns instantly, petals forming clusters of 5, then 7. The direction of the river's current. The shade of red used for a single petal, a warning color. It was a message. She deciphered it slowly, reading between strokes. Kayasaka Pass, 3rd day from now, deliver the real fan, failure means the monk dies. Her blood ran cold. Tetsuro, she whispered. Kenji read over her shoulder. His mouth tightened. They found us. Hideo removed his hat. He was younger than she'd expected, barely older than Hana, but his eyes were hard, his voice steady. They followed your trail through Masuyo's estate. Lady Masuyo was found dead, poisoned, likely for her failure. Now Akihiko sends this message with urgency. Did you read it? Kenji asked sharply. No, Hideo said. I am only a courier. But I owe a debt to Tetsuro. I will help you retrieve him, if you let me. Kenji turned to Hana. If this is real, if they have him. They'll kill him, she said, voice low. She turned the fan over. On the back was a stamped crest, not Akihiko's, but one she recognized from a commission long ago. Shiba's family mark. He was still hunting her. Later that night, Hana sat alone by the riverbank, the stolen fan in her lap. The air was still. The frogs had fallen silent. She stared at her reflection, and barely recognized the woman who looked back. She wasn't just a painter now. She was a weapon. And the time had come to use herself like one. The wind at Kayasaka Pass blew hard and dry, sending dust skimming over the narrow road that cut between the cliffs like a scar. Hana stood at its edge, wrapped in a deep blue traveling kimono, her hair pinned high in the manner of a court lady. A silk sash cinched tightly at her waist concealed the real crimson fan, still sealed, still intact. She looked over her shoulder at the mountain path they had climbed before dawn. Kenji crouched behind a rock outcropping farther up the trail, his dagger strapped to his wrist and a small satchel of smoke bombs hanging from his side. Hideo stood watch at the rear, scanning the forest for movement. No birdsong. No wind in the branches. The forest was holding its breath. Hana turned back to the road. The appointed time was near. Akihiko's message had been clear, she was to come alone, bearing the fan. One mistake, and Tetsuro would die. The plan was simple in theory, and treacherous in execution. Hana would hand over a forged version of the fan, a near-perfect replica she and Kenji had spent 2 sleepless nights painting. It lacked the coded route hidden within the brushstrokes, but to the untrained eye, it was indistinguishable. If the deception worked, they would buy time. If not... She closed her eyes, heart steadying. Footsteps echoed up the road. Shiba appeared first. He wore the same serene expression as before, that dangerous calm that masked a ruthless will. Behind him, 2 Shinsengumi soldiers dragged a blindfolded figure between them. Even bound and weakened, Tetsuro stood with quiet dignity, his robes tattered but his spine straight. Shiba smiled as he approached. "Hana-san," he said with mock politeness. "How good of you to keep your appointment." "You sent for me," she replied evenly. "I came." "Release him." "Not yet." He gestured with 2 fingers. One soldier forced Tetsuro to his knees. "First, the fan." Hana stepped forward, every movement rehearsed to the breath. She reached into her sleeve and withdrew the crimson fan, the forgery, and held it out. Shiba took it delicately, eyes scanning the lacquer, the gold patterns. "Such craftsmanship," he murmured. "You never cease to impress me." Then he snapped the fan open and studied it. Seconds passed. His eyes narrowed. Hana forced herself to stand still. Calm. He closed the fan with a sharp flick. "Kill him." "No," she shouted, surging forward, but 2 soldiers blocked her path. Tetsuro didn't flinch. Shiba raised a hand, pausing the execution. "There's a scratch here," he said, running a gloved finger along the lacquer. "Barely visible. But not on the original." He looked at her. "You tried to deceive me." Hana's voice was steel. "You sent poison through a painting. You held a monk hostage. You murder in shadows and call it order. I owed you no truth." Shiba stepped closer, his face inches from hers. "Where is the real fan?" Hana didn't answer. Behind them, the faint whistle of wind shifted. Kenji's signal. She ducked just as a smoke bomb burst in the middle of the road. Screams echoed. Chaos exploded. Kenji leapt down from the cliff edge, slicing through one of the soldiers' binds. Hideo emerged from the brush, blades flashing. Hana threw herself at Shiba, knocking the fan from his hands. It skittered across the stone, forgotten in the cloud of smoke. She dragged Tetsuro to his feet and together they fled, coughing through the thick haze. A blade sang behind her, Kenji's warning call. She turned, saw Shiba closing in with a dagger raised. Then Kenji was between them. Steel clashed. Hana didn't wait to see who would win. She pulled Tetsuro down the side path, a narrow deer trail that Hideo had scouted earlier. Behind them, the sounds of battle faded into forest silence. They didn't stop running until the sun was high and the pass far behind. They reached a shrine hidden in a grove by dusk, abandoned, but dry. Hana collapsed beside the stone steps, Tetsuro beside her, breathing heavily but alive. Kenji appeared minutes later, covered in blood, none of it his. He dropped to one knee, chest heaving, and looked at her. "You didn't run," he said. "I couldn't leave you." He smiled faintly, bruised and dust-streaked. "Good." Later that night, by the shrine fire, Hana finally retrieved the real crimson fan. She unwrapped it slowly, hands reverent. Kenji sat beside her. "We can still use it," he said. "Deliver it to the rebels in Edo. The code will reach the ones who can act on it." "I know," she said quietly. But I wonder what it's cost us. Tetsuro stirred behind them. His voice was weak, but clear. Everything with power comes at a price. Hannah nodded, staring at the gold river winding across the fan's surface. Then I hope what comes next is worth the weight of this silence. She closed the fan, slowly. The time for hiding was ending. The storm would follow. Edo, in the summer of 1864, breathed in a rhythm unlike Kyoto. It pulsed with the tension of authority and rebellion layered atop each other like mismatched lacquer, clean on the surface, fractured underneath. Guards lined the palace avenues. Processions of nobles paraded daily through the Sakurada gate, oblivious to the shadows gathering behind them. Hannah arrived with Kenji and Tetsuro on the 21st day of the month. They traveled by night, using hidden checkpoints, old trade passes, and even dressing as a traveling theater troupe at one point. The real Crimson Fan never left Hannah's person, hidden in a case strapped to her back beneath layers of silk and ash-gray travel robes. Their contact in Edo was a court scholar named Okabe Ryo, known to the resistance as Kanzen, the Mountain Scroll. He taught poetry to the sons of lords by day and passed secret orders in haiku by night. They found him at a tea-house behind the Kanda shrine, where sakura petals were replaced by rice paper walls inked with brushstroke verses. He greeted them with the formality of a man used to betrayal. "You were expected weeks ago," he said, pouring tea with an elegant hand. "We were detained," Kenji replied flatly. Okabe raised a single brow, but did not press. His eyes landed on Hannah. "So? The fan-bearer." Hannah returned his gaze. "Have you prepared the cipher readers?" "They're ready," he said, "but the moment this fan is opened, everything changes." "It already has," she said quietly. That night, in the chamber beneath the tea-house, Hannah placed the crimson fan on a table of lacquered pine. Candles flickered. Okabe, Kenji, and two others, a monk with burned scars and a woman with ink-stained hands, leaned in as she opened it. The room was silent as they studied it. Kenji spoke first. "The route is clear. But it doesn't stop at Edo." Okabe's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Hannah leaned forward, tracing the flow of the river in gold. "The code doesn't end with delivery. It continues, into the north." The monk, Hisao, pointed to a motif of tiny trees barely visible above the fan's horizon. "These aren't symbolic. That's Mount Iwakura." The woman, Miko, paled. "The northern estates. That's Clan Yonezawa." "Lord Kagetomo's territory," Okabe muttered. "But he's loyal to the shogunate." Kenji shook his head. "Or so it's believed. This fan, it's not a delivery map. It's a plan. A campaign route." Hannah's fingers curled. "Someone is planning an offensive, and using both rebels and loyalists to mask their real agenda." Tetsuro spoke from the doorway, voice rough. "Someone within both sides. Someone who profits from the chaos." They all turned to him. "The fan wasn't created by a rebel," the monk said slowly. "It was crafted by a strategist." Kenji looked at Hannah. "Akihiko?" She shook her head. "He wanted the fan, but he didn't write it." Okabe rose and stepped into the adjoining chamber. When he returned, he carried a scroll, long, sealed with the chrysanthemum crest of the imperial household. "I've only ever opened this in dreams," he said. "It was smuggled out of Kyoto 6 months ago, before the emperor's illness worsened. Look at the brushwork. Compare it." He unrolled the scroll beside the fan. They matched. Down to the smallest curl of ink. Hannah stepped back. "It wasn't Akihiko," she whispered. "It was someone in the imperial court." Okabe nodded grimly. This isn't rebellion. This is succession. The following day, Hana walked alone through the palace gardens, dressed as a court painter summoned to display her work. A contact of Okabe's had arranged the papers. She carried a new fan, not the crimson one, but within its pattern of cranes and pine, she had embedded a silent warning. Her eyes watched every movement. Servants. Guards. Courtiers in gold-trimmed robes. And then, near the lotus pond, she saw him. Lord Tachibana Naomichi, cousin to the emperor. A gentleman with a scholar's grace and a poet's soul. She had painted for him once, years ago, when she was just learning her craft. He had complimented her brushwork. Given her grandfather rare paper from Nara. He was standing in the garden, speaking quietly with an aide. She remembered his handwriting now, elegant and spare. It matched the strokes on the fan. Her mouth went dry. The architect of the encoded fan, the one who plotted to move armies under the guise of rebellion, wasn't shogunate, or rebel, or foreign agent. He was imperial blood. He was family to the throne. That night, back at the tea house, Hana sat across from Kenji, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "It's him," she said. "Lord Tachibana. He created the fan. He's playing both sides, feeding chaos to weaken the shogunate and position himself for control when the dust settles." Kenji didn't speak for a long time. "Then, what do we do?" "Expose him." "Impossible," said Okabe, pacing the room. "He's a member of the court. To accuse him without proof is suicide. Even with the fan." "No," Hana said. "Not with the fan. With another fan." They looked at her. She opened her satchel and pulled out a blank silk base. "If this one led them into a trap," she said softly, "then we'll paint another that leads them to the truth." Kenji blinked. "A double deception?" "A mirror," Hana said. "One fan started the fire. Let the next one name the arsonist." The blank fan before her was pale and silent, silk stretched across bamboo slats, waiting to breathe. Hana sat alone in the cellar of the tea house, surrounded by scrolls, pigments, and silence. Candles flickered against the earthen walls. The crimson fan, the original map, lay to her right, open like a wound. Her brushes lay to her left, as still as swords in a dojo. The moment had come to forge the mirror. This fan would not deliver secrets in the shadows. It would reveal them in plain sight, to the right eyes, and destroy the man behind them. Lord Tachibana Naomichi. He, who had played both court and rebels like pieces on a go board. He, who had designed a map not just for the movement of troops, but for the orchestration of war itself. A war that would leave the old shogunate broken and the new imperial government beholden to him alone. Hana's hand hovered over the silk. Every brushstroke had to speak two languages, one for the innocent eye, and one for the trained. A painting of a noble procession, perhaps? No, too easy to decipher. A festival scene? Too crowded. She needed clarity, elegance, intent. Her mind went to her childhood. A poem her mother once whispered in the quiet of summer. When the crane flies backward / the river forgets its name / and the mountain bows. She exhaled, dipped her brush in ink, and began. The central image was a mountain temple, serene, tall, and unmistakably modeled after a northern stronghold under Tachibana's control. At its base, 3 cranes flew in strange formation, 2 north, 1 circling back, a signal of betrayal within the rebel faction. The river below twisted unnaturally, shaped subtly into kanji glyphs when viewed in reflection. Together, they formed a name, Naomichi. It was elegant. It was undeniable. And it was dangerous. She painted for 6 hours without pause, not stopping to eat or speak. Her strokes grew sharper as the fan unfolded, the colors darker, not with violence, but with consequence. The edges were framed in a cherry tree shedding its petals, a symbol of fleeting power. By dawn, the fan was complete. She folded it carefully, placed it in a wooden case lacquered black, and tied it with a red cord. When Kenji entered the room, he stopped at the threshold. "You look like you've killed a man," he said. "I have," Hannah whispered. "He just doesn't know it yet." That evening, the tea house hosted one of its secret salons, a gathering of poets, actors, and low-ranking nobles known to sympathize with the rebellion. Among the guests was an imperial courier sent by a minor prince, not high enough to be noticed, but connected enough to pass a message into court. Hannah approached him with a quiet bow, offering the fan as a gift. "It's a new commission," she said. "For Lord Tachibana." The man accepted it, impressed. "You've painted for him before?" "Yes," Hannah said. "But never like this." The courier delivered the fan 2 days later. By the 4th day, rumors began to swirl in the southern districts. A painting had been seen, subtle, mysterious, depicting a mountain lord whose name had been hidden in its rivers. A poem circulated with it. He who writes in silence must one day be read aloud. By the 6th day, 2 of Tachibana's advisors were arrested for questionable correspondence. By the 7th, his estate in the north had been raided by imperial loyalists. The trap had sprung. But with it came retaliation. That night, a paper kite bearing the crest of the Tachibana house was found nailed to the tea house door. On it, "One stroke, one life." A warning. Or a promise. "We have to leave," Kenji said as the fire was doused and the doors barred. "No," Hannah replied. "If we disappear now, the court will assume we were part of his deception. We stay. We finish this." Kenji looked at her, no longer as a girl who painted fans in Gion, but as something else. Something unbreakable. "You're not the same woman I knew," he said. "I hope not," Hannah whispered. "She would have died already." The next morning, a letter arrived, unsigned, sealed with wax shaped like a broken chrysanthemum. Inside, a single line of elegant calligraphy. "You've won the game. But the board is not yet burned." Hannah stared at it, fingers trembling. The war wasn't over. But for now, the brush had struck true. The rain fell soft and constant over Edo's rooftops, draping the city in a gray veil that muffled footsteps and dulled the clatter of hooves and carts. In the tea-house cellar, where maps were drawn and secrets whispered, the air was sharp with tension. Okabe paced the floor. Kenji sat against the wall, polishing the hilt of his dagger, jaw tight. Hannah stood near the doorway, arms crossed, the coated fan wrapped and secured inside a new lacquer case. It had become more than an artifact, it was now a weapon, a verdict, a prophecy. And someone wanted it destroyed. "They knew about our courier's route," Okabe muttered. "No one outside this room had that information. Yet he was dead by morning, fan gone." Kenji didn't look up. "You're saying there's a traitor among us?" "I'm not saying it," Okabe snapped. "I'm living it." The fan had vanished on its way to an Edo archive meant to preserve it as proof. The courier had been found strangled beneath the Sumida Bridge. His body bore no wounds, only a crimson ink blot across the chest, the mark of Shiba. "He's not dead," Hannah said at last. "Shiba survived Kayasaka Pass." Kenji's eyes flicked toward her. "Then he'll come here. Soon," she said. "Especially if he knows about the next fan." Okabe turned. "There is no next fan." The first broke Tachibana's grip. We were supposed to retreat. Lie low. There's another name, Hana said quietly. Another player. Okabe froze. Who? She opened her satchel and pulled out the first fan, the real one, the fan that had started it all. With the betrayal of the courier, its preservation now fell to her again. She unfolded it and pointed to a seemingly innocuous detail, a ridge line painted above the second crane. The kanji are written in a secondary cipher, she explained. Overlay them with the plum blossom positions from the second fan. It spells out a name. Kenji rose, suddenly alert. A name? She dipped her brush into water and began sketching. The strokes were faint, ghost-like. As they connected, a symbol emerged. Kanzen. Okabe stepped back. No, he whispered. Hana stared at the character. You gave the courier the route. No one else could have known it. Kenji looked at Okabe, his voice tight. You sold the route. Okabe's hands trembled. You think I gave it to Shiba? After everything I've done for the cause? You tell me, Kenji said coldly. I had no choice. Okabe shouted. Tachibana had my son, a hostage. He threatened to have him killed unless I passed false intelligence. And instead, you passed real intelligence, Hana said, softly. You let Shiba kill our courier. You gave him the fan. I thought if I misled Shiba, I could buy time, Okabe whispered. I didn't know he'd find the real one. Kenji moved as if to strike, but Hana stepped between them. Enough. This isn't justice, it's grief. Kenji stopped, trembling with fury. Where's your son now? Hana asked. Okabe looked down. I don't know. That night, Hana sat alone in the tea house, watching the ink run in the rain. Every line of the fan had been drawn in sacrifice. Every brushstroke had cost blood. Was it enough? Would the world they built with secrets and codes be worth the lives buried beneath them? Kenji joined her hours later. He said nothing. He sat beside her, shoulder to shoulder, both of them watching the single candle burn low. I keep thinking, he said at last, that maybe none of this was worth it. She looked at him. You're wrong. The fan was never just a message. It was a mirror. It forced them to see themselves. And what do you see in it? He asked. She picked up her brush. Dipped it in ink. Drew a single stroke across the paper. Us, she said. They fled Edo 2 nights later. Okabe stayed behind, to answer for what he'd done. Whether the rebels forgave him, or executed him, Hana never found out. She and Kenji moved east, toward the coast, toward Nikko, where the resistance was rumored to be consolidating power under a new symbol, not a sword or fan, but a scroll of ink tied with red string. A whisper of change. A promise of something new. But on the road north, just past the river crossing at Hanno, Hana received a letter wrapped in oilcloth and bound with twine. No name. No seal. Inside, a single line. The crimson fan was only the first wind. The storm comes behind it. And with it, a brush. Her own. Lost weeks ago. Recovered by someone who wanted her to know. They were still watching. Nikko shimmered like a temple in the mist, its forests deep and solemn, its shrines veiled in cloud. To most, it was a place of prayer and pilgrimage. But to those in the shadows, it had become something else, a crucible of rebellion. By the time Hana and Kenji arrived, they had passed through 6 checkpoints, bribed 2 Ronin patrols, and crossed a half-frozen stream using only rope and silence. The fan remained hidden beneath Hana's robes, now wrapped in 3 layers of parchment and oilcloth. It wasn't just a message anymore, it was an artifact of betrayal, proof of shifting allegiances and dead ideologies. The camp at Nikko was not what Hannah had imagined. It was larger. Tents sprawled across the forest floor like autumn leaves, each marked with symbols: pine for scouts, ink for couriers, fire for saboteurs. Men trained in the clearings. Women forged blades over makeshift bellows. Messengers whispered beneath banners hung with crimson and black. But what chilled her most was not the scale. It was the silence. No music. No laughter. No poetry. Only discipline. Orders barked in hushed tones. Eyes watching, always watching. Kenji noticed it too. "This isn't a resistance," he muttered. "It's an army." They were led through the heart of the camp by a young soldier barely older than Hannah. He was polite, efficient, and completely unreadable. At the far edge, behind a grove of cedars, stood a longhouse bearing no markings. Inside waited Commander Fujiwara Shun, the man many now whispered would be the first chancellor if the shogunate fell. Fujiwara greeted them without rising. His robes were plain. His beard trimmed short. His left hand never left the hilt of the blade resting at his side. "You are the painter," he said, voice low and deep. "I am Hannah," she replied. He gestured to a map. "The fan you carry has set fire to Kyoto and sent shockwaves through Edo. You've done more in ink than we've done with steel in 5 years." She said nothing. He continued. "But ink fades. Steel endures. We need you to finish what you started." Kenji stepped forward. "What do you mean?" Fujiwara's eyes never left Hannah. "I want her to paint the next message, not a warning, not a cipher. A declaration." Hannah's stomach tightened. "A declaration of what?" "The end," he said simply. "We march on Edo at the harvest moon." "You can't," Kenji said. "You don't have the numbers." "We don't need numbers. We have fire. Explosives in the granaries. Support from rogue units in Osaka. Ronin from the north ready to flood the southern roads." "And the people?" Hannah asked. "What happens to them?" "They'll choose the victor, as they always do." She stared at him. "You want me to start a war?" He smiled. "No. You've already started it. I'm just giving it a name." That night, Hannah wandered the outer camp alone. She passed a group of children learning to sharpen blades. A woman tattooing rebellion verses on the arms of teenage fighters. A boy sketching maps by candlelight, maps of Edo burning. The cause she had believed in was here, alive, but it was no longer hers. It had mutated. Or maybe it had always been this way. She found Kenji beneath a cedar, sharpening his knife. "They want to use me," she said. "They already are. What do I do?" He looked up. "You don't paint." She nodded. "And then?" "They kill us." They sat in silence for a while. Then Kenji said something she didn't expect. "There's another way." They left before dawn. No words. No goodbyes. They left the crimson fan behind, not in surrender, but as bait. A final decoy. In its place, Hannah left a note folded inside the lacquered case. "Ink is not a weapon. Not yours. Not anymore." They traveled east under false names, posing as a calligraphy master and his apprentice. At night, Hannah painted quietly by candlelight, not fans, not maps, but portraits of the people they met: a rice farmer's daughter, a blind lute player, a merchant who had once been a samurai. She no longer needed hidden meanings. She painted truth. But on the 15th night, as they crossed into a wooded valley, a shadow stepped into their path. He wore blue. His katana glinted silver. Shiba. Alive. And smiling. The forest was quiet but alert, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Hana stood still on the narrow path, her breath misting in the cool air. Kenji stepped slightly ahead, hand near his dagger. The man in their way was motionless, tall, composed, dressed in the same blue robes of the Shinsengumi. But his blade was already drawn, resting casually against his shoulder like a silver promise. Shiba. His eyes met Hana's and stayed there, cold as river ice. I had wondered, he said, how long you'd keep running. Kenji didn't move. She's not running. No, Shiba said softly, stepping forward. She's hiding. It's different. Hiding is quiet. Running is desperate. She paints quietly now. I paint truth, Hana said. Ah. Shiba's mouth curved into a mirthless smile. A dangerous medium these days. The wind stirred the leaves. No other sound. I followed the ripples you left behind, he continued. Tachibana is dead. Okabe, exiled. Fujiwara lost half his camp after you vanished. You're very good at starting fires. I'm good at revealing where the rot is, Hana said. You were better when you were just a girl painting fans for geisha. Maybe, she said. But she's gone. Shiba's gaze didn't waver. You carry the real fan, don't you? The first one. Kenji's fingers twitched near his blade. I destroyed it, Hana said. Shiba raised an eyebrow. Lie. Does it matter? She asked. You kill truth as easily as you kill men. I kill to preserve peace. You kill to keep power from shifting. You speak like a rebel, he said, stepping closer. But you never picked a side. I did. I picked the people who die while men like you and Tachibana draw maps in their blood. Shiba stopped. And what will you draw now, Hana? Now that there's no court, no resistance, no cause left to believe in? I'll draw the truth. He tilted his head. Then let me offer you a truth. His foot moved. In one breath, he was on them. Kenji lunged, blade drawn, steel on steel. The impact rang out like a temple bell. Hana darted back, slipping behind a tree as Kenji and Shiba circled each other, feet light on pine needles. Shiba was fast, faster than she remembered, and colder. Kenji fought like a man protecting something sacred, his blows sharp and desperate. But he was wounded. Tired. A feint, a slash, Kenji stumbled back, bleeding from the side. No, Hana breathed. She moved. Her fingers curled around the only thing she carried that had any weight, a travel case, lacquered black, inside which rested a decoy fan wrapped in paper and ash. She stepped into the clearing. Shiba. He paused, turning. She raised the fan case. Like a blade. This is what you want. Let him go. Shiba's eyes flicked to the case, then to her. You'd give it up so easily? I'll trade it for his life. Kenji groaned behind her. Hana. Quiet. Shiba smiled. Bring it to me. She did. Slowly, step by step. Until she stood less than a foot away. She looked up at him. You know, I never painted your portrait. He blinked. What? Then she slammed the case into his face. Inside it, no fan. Just powdered ink pigment and a shard of glass from an old broken bottle, both flung upward with the full force of her arm. Sheba screamed as black dust and blood filled his eyes. Kenji surged forward, slicing across Sheba's thigh. The man staggered. Another strike, and Sheba crumpled to the ground, gasping. Kenji stood over him, shaking. "Do it," Sheba hissed. "End it." Kenji looked at Hana. She shook her head. "No," she said. "Let him live in blindness. Let him walk the road with nothing to read but regret." Kenji hesitated, then stepped back. Sheba said nothing. He only lay still, eyes sealed by darkness, blade fallen. That night, they built no fire. They moved silently through the forest, their path lit only by moonlight and memory. At a creek, Hana stopped and unwrapped the real fan. The lacquer was worn now. Its gold faded. But the message remained. She laid it on a flat stone and stared. Then she whispered. "Enough." She lit a match. The fan burned. Silk curled. Ink bled. Bamboo cracked. By dawn, it was ash. The road to Kyoto was longer than Hana remembered. Not in distance, but in weight. Each step carried the memory of what she had burned, what she had lost. The fan was gone, but the world it shaped still trembled. The war had not come in the shape they expected, not as armies clashing in the capital, but as silence, a reorganization of power behind closed doors, quiet purges, letters that never reached their destination. The resistance had fractured. The court had buried its secrets. But nothing had healed. And now, someone had called her back. The message arrived through an old courier's network, tied to a scroll sealed with lacquer and wrapped in rice paper. The calligraphy was unmistakable, her grandfather's hand. "Return, Hana. It is not over." No signature. No instruction. Just that. Kenji didn't argue when she told him. "I'll come with you," he said. But Hana shook her head. "Not yet. I need to see it alone." They parted under a willow tree outside Shizuoka, where the river forked. He gave her a small knife, wrapped in a handkerchief. She gave him the last fan she ever painted, a plain one, no codes, no secrets. Just a white crane lifting from the reeds. "For luck," she said. He didn't say goodbye. He only watched her walk into the dawn mist. Kyoto had changed. There were fewer guards on the streets now. The banners of the shogunate no longer hung from the city gates. But the fear hadn't left. It had only gone deeper, burrowing into the stones and would like mold. The Gion district still carried the scent of plum wine and roasted fish. Lanterns still swayed on their hooks. But to Hana, it all looked smaller. Quieter. She returned to the house where she had once lived, tucked between a tea shop and an old printing store. The door creaked open at her touch. Inside, everything was just as she remembered. Dusty. Silent. A fan unfinished on the work table. Brushes stiff with dried ink. The smell of paper and time. Her grandfather was waiting in the garden. He looked older, thinner, his hands more bone than skin. But his eyes were clear, and his voice was still warm when he spoke. "You came. I thought you might be dead," she said. He shrugged. "We all are, eventually." She sat beside him in the garden, under the flowering plum tree. He poured tea. The same way he always had. Carefully. No haste. "I know about the fan," he said. Hana said nothing. "I know what it cost you. What you did." "How?" she asked. "I taught you to paint," he said. Every master sees their student strokes, even if the world doesn't. She looked down. Then you know I failed. No, he said. You broke the cycle. Hannah shook her head. There's another. There always is. He smiled, faintly. Then paint again. I burned it all. Not your hands. He reached into the folds of his robe and handed her a bundle. It was old. Thin. A letter. She unfolded it slowly. Inside, a sketch. Simple. Unfinished. A child's brushwork, a landscape of cranes, a river, and a rising sun. Her signature at the bottom. A fan she'd painted when she was 13. You drew this the day your mother died, he said. I remember. You said you wanted to make something that didn't lie. She traced the faded lines with her fingertip. Did I? He nodded. You told the truth before you even knew what it meant. He stood slowly, shakily. Come. There's someone who's waited to meet you. He led her down the street, through alleys she hadn't walked since she was a girl. Past shuttered shops and the old No Theater, now closed. To a tea house. It was simple, unadorned. And inside was a young woman with ink-stained fingers and eyes like fire. She stood when Hannah entered. I am Aika, she said. I trained under Okabe. Before, everything. Hannah bowed slightly. Why did you call me here? Aika laid a scroll on the table. We've begun rebuilding. Quietly. No armies. Just messages. Truths. Testimonies. Not to fight. But to record. Before everything is rewritten. She unrolled the scroll. Dozens of painted fans. Each telling a different story. A betrayal. A resistance. A name once feared, now vanished. And a space at the bottom, empty. For you, Aika said. Hannah looked at her hands. And for the first time in weeks, she reached for a brush. Not as a weapon. Not as a spy. Not as a fugitive. But as Hannah. The painter. The witness. The survivor. The brush felt strange in her hand. Not heavy, it had always been light, but aware, somehow. As if it, too, understood the weight of what was to come. Hannah sat cross-legged in the center of the tea-house chamber. Aika watched silently from the doorway. Outside, Guillaume moved on, the quiet clatter of wooden sandals, the low hum of merchants setting out morning tea, the laughter of young apprentices unaware of what had once nearly torn their city apart. Before her lay the silk base, clean, flawless, the pale ivory canvas of a new fan. It had no code. No cipher. No hidden marks. And yet, what Hannah planned to paint would be more dangerous than anything she'd created before, because this time, she wasn't trying to hide. She dipped the brush into black ink, let the excess drip back into the pot, and began. The first image was of a crane, wings spread wide. Not in flight, but falling. Its feathers were imperfect. Tattered. Not a symbol of grace, but one of cost. Beneath it, a river twisted, not as a map, but as memory. Its currents bore the shapes of fans. Some cracked. Some burning. One sealed in gold. She painted them drifting downstream, as if carried by time. On the fan's left edge, she painted a narrow alley in Kyoto, lit by paper lanterns. A shadow stood at the edge, a girl barely grown, her face half-lit, watching powerful men speak in whispers they thought no one could hear. She was nameless. Faceless. But every stroke said, I was there. On the right, she painted a man standing over a blade in the forest. His face was blurred. His hand, empty. The blood on his sleeve spoke for him. Kenji. And between them, rising like smoke, was the crimson fan, burning, its gold letters dissolving into ash, carried on the wind toward a rising sun. The fan had been a lie. A trap. A truth. A path. Now, it was history. When she was done, she signed it simply. Hannah. That night, she brought the fan to Aika. They did not speak. Together, they walked to the old archive beneath the Kyoto temple, once a storehouse for imperial records, now reclaimed by those who remembered. Inside, dozens of fans lined the walls, mounted behind glass and silk. Each was a confession. A testimony. A weapon turned to witness. Aika placed Hannah's fan on the final pedestal. "You're certain?" she asked. "Yes," Hannah said. "Let it be seen." Aika stepped back and lit the lanterns. The room glowed. And for the first time, Hannah saw her story in full, not the brushstrokes, but the spaces between them. The silence. The moments she had never drawn. The ones no one would ever see. A girl painting in Gion. A man laughing over tea. A monk kneeling beside a river. A blade that never struck. She turned to Aika. "Will anyone care?" Aika smiled. "They already do." By morning, the fan had a name among the rebels. They called it the fan of ash and wind. It was copied. Whispered about. Never forged, for no one dared to imitate something so honest. It didn't start a war. But it started memory. And memory was the one thing the powerful could never fully destroy. Hannah left Kyoto weeks later. No one saw her go. She took only one brush, one scroll, and the fan Kenji had once given back to her, the one painted with nothing but a single white crane, lifting skyward, free. She didn't leave to hide. She left to watch. To paint. To remember. To make sure no one ever said, "That never happened." Because she would always answer. "Yes, it did. And here's the fan to prove it." The village of Shimakata sat nestled at the northern edge of Honshu, where mist rose from pine-covered hills and the sea whispered its own slow truths. Hannah had lived here for nearly half a year, quietly painting landscapes and portraits for farmers and monks, never signing her name. She had chosen this place for its silence. But silence, like all things, had its end. It arrived in the form of Kenji, appearing one stormy evening at the edge of her gate, soaked to the bone, eyes hard with exhaustion and purpose. "You should sit," he said as she opened the door. She did not ask why. She lit the lamp, poured him tea, and waited. He did not touch the cup. "They're using your name," he said quietly. "In Edo. In Kanazawa. Even in Nagasaki. They're calling you the Crimson Brush. A revolutionary. A martyr. They say you died for the truth. That the fans you painted were sacred." Hannah stared into the flame. "Let them." "No," he said. "You don't understand. They're twisting it." Her throat tightened. "How?" "There's a man, Ryutaro. He claims he found your final fan. He's painting replicas. Selling them. Holding sermons. His followers burn government scrolls in your name." "I burned the fan," she whispered. "Doesn't matter. They've made a new one." He pulled something from his satchel. A fan. Crimson lacquer. White cranes flying over a mountain of corpses. She recoiled. "This is a lie." "Yes," Kenji said. But it's a beautiful one. And people believe it. She stood and turned away. Then let them believe it. What does it matter now? Because they've taken your truth and sharpened it into a weapon you never meant to build. They chant your name like a sword. And they're planning something, another uprising. She closed her eyes. I gave them memory. You gave them fire, Kenji said. Now they want you back. As a myth. Or a banner. Or a body. Silence fell between them, broken only by the hiss of rain against the roof. Then Kenji stood and placed a folded letter beside her inkstone. This was sent to the shrine archive in Kyoto. Addressed to you. Written by Ryutaro himself. Hana stared at it. I won't open it, Kenji said. But you should. He left before dawn. It took her a full day to open the letter. The brushstrokes were elegant, practiced, the hand of a man who understood the power of symbols. Hanadano. Your work was a flame in darkness. We have kept it alive. The time has come to reignite it. Return. Paint for the people again. Not as witness, but as herald. They already believe in you. All that remains is for you to accept their belief. Ryutaro. There was no threat in the letter. Only a certainty. As if she had no choice but to become the myth they had built in her name. She sat for a long time. Then she pulled out the fan Kenji had shown her. Its lines were crude imitations. The corpses, grotesque. The cranes, blood-drenched. It was everything she had never wanted to be. She burned it. The smoke rose like a silent prayer. Then she pulled out fresh silk. A blank fan. She didn't know what she would paint yet. But she knew who would paint it. Not Ryutaro. Not a martyr. Not a myth. Hana. Edo was louder than she remembered. Not in sound, but in story. Every tea house, every paper seller, every back alley scroll stand seemed to whisper her name. The crimson brush. A ghost. A prophet. A woman who painted rebellion into the folds of silk and ash. Hana moved through the crowds in silence, dressed in gray, face veiled. She carried no visible weapons. Only a bundle strapped to her back, blank fans and one brush, tied with red string. They passed her in the street, a group of students chanting verses attributed to her. A storyteller performing a tale of her supposed escape from shogunate torture. A merchant selling authentic fragments of the original crimson fan, wrapped in gauze and priced in silver. None of it was true. And all of it was hers. She stopped at a print shop near the Nyanbashi Bridge. In the window was a broadside poster, bold, sweeping calligraphy over a crimson splash of ink. The crimson brush returns. Ryutaro speaks. Tonight, the red stage. She entered. Where is it? She asked the shopkeeper. He blinked. The theater? Southeast, near the old granary. You can't miss it. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. The red stage sat like a wound in the center of a cobbled square, once a shipping depot, now a makeshift open-air theater ringed with wooden scaffolding and painted banners. Crimson cloth billowed from the upper platforms, stained with inkbrush symbols of flames, cranes, and rivers. A crowd had already gathered. And at its center stood Ryutaro. He was young, younger than she'd expected. Maybe 30. Handsome in a practiced way. Dressed in painter's robes. He stood tall on the raised platform, arms outstretched. My friends, he said, voice strong and confident, she lives. Gasps, cheers. Her message was stolen, her fan silenced, her name buried in the mud of empire. But we dug her free. We carry her truth now. We are the stroke. She is the hand. And tonight, we call her home. He turned to the side of the stage, where a girl in red carried a wrapped fan toward him on a pillow of silk. Hannah moved. She stepped onto the stage in a single breath. The crowd gasped. Ryutaro turned. Froze. Then smiled. Hanadano, he said, recovering smoothly. The people welcome you. She pulled off her veil. And threw it to the ground. Stop using my name, she said. Murmurs. Ryutaro's smile dimmed slightly. You misunderstand. I honor it. You profit from it. I preserve it. She stepped forward. You pervert it. His smile vanished. I burned the crimson fan, she said, voice rising. I destroyed it so it wouldn't become this, a tool for men who never knew what it stood for. Ryutaro looked out at the crowd. So, what did it stand for, then? Hannah unwrapped the bundle on her back. Revealed a blank fan. She held it aloft. It stood for memory. Not war. Not blood. Not martyrdom. She turned to the people. You chant my name because it's easier than remembering the names of the ones who died. The monks. The couriers. The girls who hid messages in their obi. The farmers who were silenced. You chant me because I'm easier to turn into a story. She drew a brush from her sleeve. Dipped it into ink. And painted a single stroke across the blank fan. Then she looked at Ryutaro. You want a myth? Build your own. And she left the fan at his feet. The square was silent. Then, a single person clapped. Then two. Then a wave of hands, not raised in war, but in witness. Ryutaro stared down at the fan, unsure whether to touch it. That night, Hannah returned to her old studio in Gion. The paper screens were dusty. The brush rack empty. She sat at the table and unrolled a blank scroll. This time, she would not write for rebels or lords. She would write a name. Each name. The ones they tried to erase. The ones the crimson fan had buried beneath its legend. Gion's mornings returned to their gentle rhythm, lanterns swaying in alleyways, geisha laughing behind fans, and vendors calling softly over steaming baskets of rice. But in one quiet corner, hidden behind a sliding screen and rows of drying scrolls, Hannah was building something far more dangerous than rebellion. She called it the Book of Names. It began as a scroll. A simple record of those lost during the years of silence, Okabe, whose betrayal bought time. Masuyo, who paid with her life. Tetsuro, who survived but never again spoke of Kyoto. Then came the couriers, the silent messengers, the street performers who disappeared in the night. She painted their faces from memory, or from stories others gave her. She left space beside each image for a name, even if it was only unknown. People came to her at dusk. Women who had hidden messages in kimono linings. Boys who had watched their brothers vanish into the night with a crimson fan they never understood. An old cook who once fed rebels in his back kitchen, too afraid to speak, but willing to point at a name on her scroll. Each name she added made the story clearer. Each stroke became an act of defiance. This was not art. This was preservation. It didn't take long for word to spread. Hannah had returned, not to stir war, but to record it. And that, to some, was far more dangerous. She was summoned twice to local magistrates. The first offered polite warnings. The second, a veiled threat, some memories are best left to dust. She said nothing in reply. But the next day, her workshop's outer door had been carved with a symbol. A black flame. She recognized it. It was the mark of Kurodani, a secretive faction that rose from the ashes of the old shogunate, not to restore it, but to erase everything that came before. Where the rebels had tried to expose secrets, Kurodani sought to bury them. They believed silence was strength. And they had begun to see Hana's scrolls as a threat. Kenji returned just before the summer rains, his clothes soaked from travel, his hands rough with road dust. He stood in her studio doorway, watching her work in silence. "You look different," she said. "So do you," he replied. Then he unwrapped a package from his satchel, a scroll wrapped in cloth, its seal broken. "It was intercepted in Mito," he said. "A message from Kurodani leadership." Hana unrolled it. The message was short. "The brush woman collects shadows. End her. Burn the paper. Salt the ground." Her stomach twisted. "How close are they?" she asked. Kenji glanced outside. "They're already here." That night, Hana sat at her workbench with a new brush. Not fine. Not delicate. This one was wide and rough, the kind used for painting walls, not fans. She dipped it in deep black ink and drew a single stroke across the edge of the studio wall. Then another. And another. By morning, the outside of her workshop bore the names of the forgotten, written boldly for all to see. She painted through the afternoon. She painted into the night. Villagers began to stop, to read, to whisper. Some cried. Some joined her. One old woman brought a name on a torn piece of kimono silk. A merchant left behind a coin, pressed into the wood beside his sister's name. By the third day, a small boy brought a brush of his own and asked, "Can I write my father's name?" Hana knelt beside him. "Yes," she said. "Please do." When the men came, black-clad, masked, silent, they stood outside the studio and saw the wall. They didn't move. They didn't speak. They simply turned, and walked away. Because erasing one name is easy. Erasing 1,000 is not. And Hana was no longer painting alone. The wall of names stretched now across 3 buildings, the wood panels heavy with layered ink. They wrapped like a silent river through the alleyways of Gion, not a protest, not a shrine, but something new, a reckoning. Pilgrims came. Not just from Kyoto, but from Edo, Nagasaki, even distant Sendai. Monks knelt before names of fallen rebels. Couriers left offerings of plum wine and rice. A woman from the northern provinces wept before the name of her husband, written beside the phrase, "Unknown courier, Shimonoseki route." The city was quiet. Watchful. And the government noticed. It was no longer the shogunate, that structure had finally collapsed under its own contradictions and centuries of tension. In its place, a provisional council had formed, a mix of court bureaucrats, young reformers, and pragmatic nobles. Their goal was simple: unify the country, restore order, and write the new Japan. And for that, they needed symbols. They needed Hana. The summons came by official courier. Emblazoned with the chrysanthemum seal of the imperial court, the scroll was bound in gold thread. Hana didn't open it at first. She only stared at it, fingers curled tightly in her sleeve. Kenji read her hesitation. "You don't have to go," he said. "Yes," she replied. "I do. You owe them nothing." "I owe the people," she said quietly. "Not the ones who want me to wear a crown of ash. But the ones who still kneel at the wall." Kyoto greeted her like an old friend with a long memory, not cruel, but not warm. The city had shifted again. Gone were the secret patrols and shadowy spies. Now, government banners fluttered in public squares, and the streets were filled with announcements about land reforms, education councils, and public rail plans. But fear hadn't vanished. It had simply changed robes. She was led to the old imperial guest house, once guarded by soldiers, now manned by scribes and officials. In the central chamber, she was received by Minister Arai, a polished, soft-spoken man in silk robes and lacquered sandals. He bowed deeply. "Lady Hannah," he said, as if speaking to a statue. "You are a name that lives in every village. A flame we cannot afford to extinguish." "I'm not a flame," she said. "I'm a painter." He smiled, too smoothly. "And ink, as we know, shapes memory more permanently than fire." He gestured to a scroll behind him, a draft of the proposed Charter of Unification. A document meant to symbolize the dawn of a new Japan. He placed a brush beside it. "We would ask one thing." She waited. "Your signature," he said. "And your blessing." She glanced at the document. It was filled with fine phrases, justice, harmony, tradition, but every word read like lacquered compromise. There was no mention of those lost. No apology. No acknowledgement of the lies that had paved the way to this so-called peace. "I won't bless what you're not brave enough to name," she said. Arai's smile faltered. "If you refuse, your name may lose its power. Others may write it for you." "I never wanted power," Hannah said. "Only memory." That night, she walked the city alone. Past the shrine where she had once seen rebels whisper. Past the tea-house where she had first seen the crimson fan. Past the alley where a girl once crouched, watching history unfold behind silken sleeves and steel glances. And she returned to the wall. The people were still there. A mother pressed her hand to her daughter's name. A young man painted a sibling's kanji with shaking fingers. A soldier stood in silence, lips moving, tears in his eyes. She climbed the platform at the wall's center. The crowd turned to her. She held no fan. No brush. Just her voice. "I was asked today to bless a charter," she said. "A document that names peace, but not the price it took to find it." She looked out over the gathering. "I will not sign that scroll. But I will sign this one." She turned and picked up her brush. And on the largest panel of the wall, she wrote in bold, black strokes. "We are not ink to be shaped by rulers. We are memory. We remember ourselves." That night, the council retracted their invitation. But it didn't matter. Because the people had already signed their own charter, in silence, in ink, in the spaces between names. And Hannah? She returned home. No longer a painter of fans. But of truths. Of all the things they tried to bury beneath banners. Years passed. The names faded slowly from the wall in Guyon, rain wearing down the oldest strokes until they blurred into wood grain. But the stories did not vanish. New ones were painted beside the old, in different hands, different styles. Calligraphy mixed with sketches. Testimonies with poems. Some names were carved into the wood itself with knives or fingernails. Some were traced over again and again. It had stopped being Hannah's wall. It had become everyone's. Hannah grew older in a house by the sea, a small, wind-worn structure perched atop a cliff in Toba, where the air always smelled of salt and the waves never stopped speaking. She lived alone, but never lonely. Children came sometimes, students, artists, wanderers. They brought her stories, questions, scrolls to look at, brushwork to critique. She taught when she felt strong enough, cooked when the winds were soft, and painted only when silence called. Her hands had grown slower. her lines more deliberate. But her eyes had not dulled. One summer, a young girl named Emmy arrived. No older than Hannah had been the day she first painted the tale of Genji on silk. Emmy had sharp eyes, quiet feet, and a habit of listening more than she spoke. "I want to learn how to tell the truth," she said one evening, as they sat under the moonlight. Hannah looked at her. "That's not something I can teach," she said. "Only something I can show." Together, they painted. Not fans, not anymore, but long panels of scrolls that wrapped around the room like rivers. Hannah taught her the old strokes. The pause before a downward line. The weight of silence between characters. The restraint of leaving space unfilled. "You don't have to shout to be heard," Hannah said. "Ink whispers louder than any anthem." They painted the names again, not the old ones, but new ones Emmy collected from villages along her journey, midwives, lost teachers, children who carried stories in song. All anonymous. All precious. One day, Emmy asked, "Will they remember you?" Hannah paused. "I hope not." Emmy blinked. "Why?" "Because they don't need to," Hannah said. "They only need to remember what I remembered." Autumn came. Then winter. One night, the sea howled louder than before. And Hannah did not wake. There was no procession. No tomb. That was her wish. Instead, Emmy took her teacher's final brush, still stained with ink, and returned to Kyoto. She walked through Gion in silence. The wall was still there. She climbed the old platform, unrolled a fresh scroll, and wrote in crisp, strong strokes. She remembered. "So now, I do." That night, another name was added to the wall. Not in gold. Not in crimson. Just plain black ink. Hannah. Painter. Witness. Memory.